I say to you that this man went down to his house declared right rather than the other. For everyone who is exalting himself shall be humbled, and he who is humbling himself shall be exalted. If you're trying to keep the Sabbath, you are not exalting yourself. Because that's what Christianity will tell you. Oh, you're just exalting yourself. They're categorizing it in the same category as this stuff. You're trying to work your way into righteousness. Well, works is part of what defines righteousness. Doing what right is what defines righteousness. However, there's also self-righteousness. There's also humility, and there's also out-of-control ego and pride. And so if you're doing the works for the wrong reason, in the wrong approach, with the wrong attitude, it avails you nothing. That's all he's saying. However, if you do the works, and you do it with the right attitude and the right approach, it avails you much. Because remember, this tax collector did a work. He went before the Father humbly and repented and said, I'm sorry, I'm a sinner, have mercy on me. Well, Abba tells us to do that. So that was a work. It was the beginning of the process of repentance and teshuvah, the turning back onto the correct path. So he didn't go in there and say, hey, I do all these things that I want to do and I don't really care what you have to say about me. I know I'm fine. Look, how many times have you had this conversation? I have this many times with people that are coming out of mainstream Christianity. They'll say, oh, I'm fine, don't worry, Abba knows my heart and he approves of what I'm doing and I'm sure he's okay. And my answer is always the same. You better be. I hope you're right, because if you're not, you're in big trouble. So if you are doing something that may be a slight deviation from what the Word says, and you think Abba's approving it, well, if you're wrong, you're in trouble. So I'd be a little nervous about just confidently saying, oh, I'm sure he's okay with this little situation, or my doing this even though I know it's wrong. I've had people say to me over and over again over time saying, I know it's wrong, but. Anybody have that conversation with anybody? Oh, I know it's wrong. I know I'm not supposed to do this. Then why are you doing it? Any sentence that starts off with, I know it's wrong, should end with, and that's why I'm no longer doing it. And that's why I'm going to stop doing it now. You can't go with, I know it's wrong, into some justification of doing it then. Because now you're really in trouble. You already admitted you know that it's wrong. Which means that you cannot be righteous at that moment, because righteous means you're doing what's right. And if you already know you're doing what's wrong, well, then you certainly can't be declared righteous at that moment. And don't be telling me, oh, but I've got the imputed righteousness of Yeshua. Really? That mocks the righteousness of Yeshua. If you're going to claim that you can have that while you're doing something you know is wrong. Now you're making fun of him. They accuse us of making fun of him because we want to do works. How many of you have heard that? Oh, if you try to do works, you're just mocking what Yeshua did. You're saying it wasn't good enough. You're saying what he did wasn't enough. Anybody heard that? Way too many times, right? No, what's mocking him is when people say, well, I know it's wrong. Well, I know Christmas comes from paganism. Well, I know Easter really is. Well, I know I shouldn't eat pork. Well, I know. Well, anytime they start off with, I know it's wrong, and they still do it anyway, that's not good. That's wrong. That's evil. That's sin. Fill in the blanks. Whatever it is, it's not doing what's right. It's not righteous. Let's continue. Going to John chapter 5. So in Luke we saw the idea is you should not be relying on yourself. But part of this section that we're reading right now is how do you get righteousness? Well, one of the pieces that you need to make sure you embrace fully is do not rely on yourself. Now that doesn't mean that you shouldn't make any effort by looking for the righteousness of Yeshua. What it means is don't rely on yourself to decide what's right and what's wrong. Do not rely on yourself for that. Rely on Him for that and the Word to tell you what that is. See, we are very blessed to have it very simple before us. He wrote it down for us. Well, He had Moses write it down for us. And then He had Isaiah and Ezekiel and Jeremiah and all these others write it down for us. And then He had the Gospels written down for us. So we have it written before us. So you don't have to rely on yourself to make those decisions, to decide whether you're right. As a matter of fact, I would do all and having done all stand, and yet at the same time still realize, Abba, I still look to you to say, I know ultimately I'm still a sinner. I've done it the best I can. I hope that's enough. I pray that's enough. I hope my heart's right, because it's not about being perfect, it's about wanting to be perfect. It's not about being perfect, it's about wanting to be perfect. It's that word tam or tamim, which means perfect in the translations most of you have, is better translated in my opinion, filled with integrity. Which means that your desire was to be perfect even if you failed. And so that meant that every time you failed, you got upset about it and got yourself back up, brushed yourself off, and tried to be perfect again. Instead of saying, well, I guess if I can't be perfect, I might as well just go around not being perfect. He doesn't expect you to do that. He doesn't want you to quit. He expects you to want to be perfect. Because your desire is to be like his son, who was perfect. And so every time you fall short, it should frustrate you a little bit so that it gives you some motivation to try harder next time to be perfect. And it doesn't matter for you to say, well, but I know I'm going to fail, so give up. If you did that, you'd never be walking. Every child starts, stands up, walks, doesn't work. Does that hundreds of times, still doesn't work. And so what should he do? Just decide, well, obviously it doesn't work. I should just give up and stay on my hands and knees and crawl for the rest of my life. See, all of you have gone through lots of parts of this process where there are parts of your life now that you no longer struggle with, but it was a big struggle up to a point. Right? You struggled up to a point. Now you don't struggle with it anymore. Why? Because you finally got to that point where after you brushed yourself off enough times, you got it under control. Amen? So now there's other things that you struggle with. Well, good. You have new toys to play with. So there's different aspects of your life that you're now ready to now move on to focusing on and to getting right.